Oak Street rested under quiet night air, and the lamps spread soft light across the road, and parked cars stood like calm shapes waiting for morning. A dark blue luxury car sat near the corner, and its paint reflected the lamps, and its wheels were clean, and its windows were clear. The car belonged to a man named Marcus, and he lived in a small building close by, and he returned home late most nights. Marcus worked long hours at a firm downtown, and he kept to himself and greeted neighbors with a nod and a small smile. He had saved money for many years, and the car was a reward for patience and discipline and careful choices. He did not buy it to show power or to draw eyes, and he bought it because he loved the feeling of quiet success. That evening Marcus parked the car and checked the door locks and looked down the street once before walking home. The street felt safe to him, and he had lived there long enough to trust the rhythm of the place. Inside his apartment he made a simple meal and answered a few emails and planned the next day with calm focus. Outside the night deepened, and the lamps hummed softly, and the air stayed still. Across the street a group of young men stood near a closed shop, and they watched the car without speaking at first. They did not know Marcus, and they did not care to know him, and they only saw the car and built a story in their minds. Jealous thoughts grew as they whispered and laughed, and compared lives they did not understand. They spoke with careless pride and fed each other bold ideas that felt exciting in the dark. One of them pointed at the car and said it did not belong here, and the others nodded as if that made sense. Time passed, and the street emptied, and footsteps faded, and windows went dark one by one. The group stayed, and their voices grew lower, and their choices grew worse. They moved closer to the car, and circled it, as if it were a thing without an owner or a past. A spark of reckless courage pushed them forward, and none of them stopped to think about consequences. A small flame appeared, and then another, and the night changed its tone. Fire climbed the side of the car, and smoke rose fast and sharp. The quiet broke as heat cracked the air, and the smell spread down the block. The men stepped back in shock and fear, and then ran into the shadows as sirens began to wail far away. Marcus woke to the smell and the sound, and his heart jumped before his mind caught up. He rushed outside without shoes, and the cold pavement bit his feet as he stopped at the curb. He saw his car burning, and the sight felt unreal and heavy at the same time. Neighbors opened doors and gathered, and phones lifted, and whispers moved through the crowd. Marcus stood still and watched the flames eat through metal and glass and paint that once shined. Fire crews arrived and worked quickly, and the flames fell back under steady hands. Steam rose and smoke drifted away, and the car settled into a dark and broken shape. An officer approached Marcus and asked calm questions, and Marcus answered with steady words. He felt anger inside him, but he kept it quiet and focused on facts and time and details. As the scene cooled, Marcus noticed cameras on nearby buildings, and he felt a small sense of order return. He trusted that truth left marks, and those marks could be found. He thanked the officers and returned inside to change his clothes and to breathe. Sleep did not come easily, and his thoughts circled the moment again and again. Morning arrived with pale light, and the street looked different with tape and ash and silent stares. Marcus stood near the curb and listened as officers spoke about footage and witnesses. He did not raise his voice, and he did not ask for special help. He believed in process and patience, and he believed that calm strength mattered. People in the neighborhood watched him closely, and some expected anger, and others expected fear. Marcus showed neither, and his calm unsettled those who looked for drama. He made a call to his workplace and explained the delay with simple words. He then made another call and kept it brief and respectful. The call reached his father named David, and David listened without interruption. David was the Attorney General, and he was known for fairness and careful judgment. He asked his son if he was safe, and Marcus said he was. David told him to trust the law and to stay steady, and Marcus agreed. They ended the call, and the street continued its slow morning rhythm. Marcus looked once more at the remains of the car and felt a mix of loss and resolve. He decided that the night would not define him and that patience would guide his next steps. With that choice made, he walked back inside and prepared for the day ahead. Morning settled fully on Oak Street, and the smell of smoke still hung lightly in the air as people moved around the scene. The burned car sat behind yellow tape, and its shape looked tired and broken under the daylight. Ash rested on the road, and small pieces of glass caught the sun in quiet ways. Marcus stood nearby with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face remained calm and focused. Officers moved carefully around the area and spoke in low voices while taking notes and photos. They treated Marcus with respect and asked clear questions without pressure. Marcus answered honestly and shared every detail he remembered from the night. He did not guess and he did not exaggerate and he stayed with facts only. One officer pointed toward a building across the street and mentioned security cameras. Marcus followed the direction with his eyes and nodded with understanding. He believed in simple truth and he trusted that the cameras would speak clearly. This belief gave him quiet strength as the hours passed. Neighbors gathered at a distance and their whispers traveled like wind between doors. Some looked at Marcus with sympathy and others with curiosity. A few people avoided eye contact because discomfort filled the space. The street felt different, as if the event had pulled back a curtain. By midday, officers reviewed footage inside a nearby shop. Screens showed clear images of the street and the car and the faces of those involved. There was no confusion and no missing moment. The truth unfolded in plain sight, frame by frame. The officers exchanged serious looks and took careful notes. They knew the case would move forward without delay. They also knew the community would be watching closely. Order and fairness would matter more than speed. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood as people shared what they heard. Some spoke with regret and others with shock. The same group of young men who once laughed now felt eyes turned toward them. Confidence faded and silence replaced noise. Marcus returned to his apartment and cleaned the smell of smoke from his clothes. He washed his hands and sat by the window for a moment. He looked at the street below and saw a place he still called home. He reminded himself that one night could not erase years of peace. His phone rang several times that afternoon. Friends checked in and co-workers offered support. Marcus thanked them and kept his replies short. He did not want attention and he did not want pity. Later that day, an officer called to update him. The officer explained that the footage was clear and actions would follow. Marcus listened carefully and asked what he should do next. The answer was simple and direct, and it asked only for patience. As evening approached, Marcus went for a walk. He chose a longer route through quiet streets and open air. The movement helped him think and release tension. He focused on steady steps and slow breathing. Inside a small cafe nearby, people discussed the event softly. Some spoke with judgment and others with regret. Marcus passed without stopping and kept his eyes forward. He knew opinions could change faster than facts. Back at home, he prepared a simple meal and sat at the table alone. He ate slowly and reflected on the day. He felt loss, but he also felt clarity. He understood that dignity mattered most in moments like this. Another call came in as the sky darkened. It was his father David calling again. David asked about the progress and Marcus shared what he knew. David listened and reminded him that fairness required patience. David did not offer special help and he did not promise quick results. He spoke like a father and like a public servant at the same time. He told Marcus that the law worked best when followed step by step. Marcus agreed and felt pride in that shared belief. Night returned to Oak Street with calmer energy. The tape remained and the car stayed still and quiet. Marcus looked out from his window and saw officers finishing their work. He felt tired but steady. Across town, the young men involved sat together in silence. Their phones buzzed with messages they did not want to read. They realized that actions carried weight they had ignored. Fear replaced bravado as reality settled in. One of them suggested it would pass quickly. Another shook his head and said the footage was clear. They understood that nothing could be taken back. The night felt longer than any before. The next morning brought official steps. Officers visited homes and asked questions with calm authority. Names were recorded and statements were taken. The process moved forward without drama. Marcus went to work and returned to routine. He focused on tasks and meetings and deadlines. Colleagues treated him with quiet respect. No one pushed for details. During lunch he sat alone and read messages on his phone. Support continued to arrive from unexpected places. He appreciated it, but stayed grounded. He believed strength came from calm action. As days passed, the case grew clearer. Evidence aligned and timelines matched. There were no gaps and no confusion. The truth stood firm. Marcus felt a sense of order return to his life. The loss of the car still hurt, but it no longer defined his days. He reminded himself that possessions could be replaced. Character could not. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal sounds and rhythms. People swept sidewalks and greeted each other again. The memory remained, but fear faded. Life continued forward. Marcus stood once more near the empty parking space one evening. He looked at the ground, and then at the sky. He felt resolved and prepared for what came next. He knew that accountability would follow and that justice moved in its own time. The week after the fire felt slow on the outside but heavy on the inside for everyone who knew what happened on Oak Street. Marcus kept going to work and coming home on time, and he kept his face calm even when his mind replayed the flames. He did not chase rumors, and he did not argue online, and he did not stand in front of cameras. He only spoke to the officers when they called, and he answered with clear truth each time. The investigation moved quietly, but it moved forward every day. Officers collected more footage from nearby streets and matched it with the first video. They compared times and faces and small details like clothing and vehicles. Each piece fit into place like a puzzle that had only one correct picture. A detective visited Marcus at his office during lunch one day. The detective asked Marcus to confirm a few details and to review a still image. Marcus looked at the image and recognized the moment the group stepped toward the car. He felt a tightness in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. The detective thanked him and said the next step would happen soon. Marcus asked if the process would be fair, and the detective said yes. Marcus nodded and said that fairness mattered more than speed. The detective respected that answer and left with a firm handshake. Across town, the young men who caused the damage lived with growing pressure. Friends stopped laughing with them, and some people avoided them completely. Their phones kept buzzing with messages filled with judgment and warnings. They tried to act normal, but their eyes carried worry. One of them, named Ryan, told the others to stay quiet and wait. Another, named Cole, said they should say sorry and end it quickly. A third, named Mason, stared at the floor and said nothing at all. None of them felt brave anymore. They had believed the street would be empty and that no one would know. They had believed they could run and forget and move on. Now they understood the truth was recorded and saved and shared. Fear sat on their shoulders like heavy bags. 2 days later, officers arrived early in the morning at different houses. There was no shouting and no drama and no harsh behavior. There were calm voices and official words and clear instructions. The young men were taken in for questioning as neighbors watched in silence. At the station, the young men sat in separate rooms under bright lights. Time moved slowly, and each minute felt louder than the last. They tried to guess what the officers knew and what would happen next. Their minds jumped between hope and panic. Ryan tried to act confident at first and asked for water with a casual tone. Cole kept rubbing his hands together and looking at the door. Mason stared at the table and swallowed hard. Their faces showed what their voices tried to hide. In another room, a lead officer reviewed the case file once more. The file included clear video stills and timestamps and witness notes. The officer knew the case did not need force or pressure to stand. It only needed truth presented in order. The officer entered the first room and placed the file on the table. He spoke calmly and explained what the footage showed. He pointed to the screen and paused at key moments. He asked simple questions and waited for honest answers. Ryan tried to deny at first and said it could be someone else. The officer replied gently and showed another angle from a different camera. Ryan's voice weakened and his shoulders dropped. The denial did not survive the evidence. In the next room, the officer spoke to Cole. Cole tried to explain it as a foolish mistake and said he never meant it to go that far. The officer listened and said intentions did not erase actions. Cole's eyes filled with fear as he realized the weight of the situation. In the third room, Mason barely spoke. He nodded when the officer described the scene. He admitted he was there and said he did not stop it. He looked ashamed when he said those words. After the questioning, the young men were placed in a waiting area. They sat with heads down and hands still. They expected the usual path where excuses create soft landings. Instead, they faced a process that moved by rules. Then a new officer arrived and spoke in a low voice to the lead officer. The lead officer nodded and walked back to the waiting area. He looked at the young men and spoke one sentence that changed their faces. He told them the owner of the car was Marcus, and Marcus was the son of the Attorney General. The reaction was instant and obvious. Ryan went pale, and his mouth opened slightly as if he could not breathe. Cole's hands started shaking, and he whispered that it could not be true. Mason closed his eyes and leaned back as if the room had tilted. They had not thought about the owner as a person. They had not thought about a family or a life or consequences. They had only thought about a moment of power in the dark. Now they understood they had harmed someone connected to the very system they feared. News moved fast once the arrests became known. People online shared the story with loud opinions. Some demanded harsh outcomes and others demanded mercy. The noise grew, but the case stayed on its steady track. Marcus heard about the reactions, and he felt nothing close to joy. He did not want anyone to suffer out of fear. He only wanted accountability and truth. He wanted the same rules for everyone. David, the Attorney General, learned the details as the case developed. He spoke with his staff and reminded them to avoid special treatment. He refused any shortcut and refused any private favor. He said the law was not a weapon and it was not a shield for personal matters. Marcus kept his routine and avoided interviews. He drove a simple rental car for a while and accepted the quiet inconvenience. He worked late one evening and left the office when the streets were calm. He looked at the city lights and felt a strange peace. He understood that his name could open doors, but he did not want that. He had spent years building his life with effort and not with status. He wanted the outcome to mean something to the community. He wanted people to learn that choices have consequences without needing anger to teach it. As the case moved closer to court, the young men felt their world change. They met with legal support and listened to serious advice. They began to understand the difference between a joke and a life-changing mistake. They started speaking about regret in voices that sounded real. Marcus prepared himself for the next stage with calm focus. He gathered documents and worked with officers when needed. He spoke to his father only as a son and not as a person seeking power. David supported him with quiet strength and careful distance. Oak Street slowly returned to normal routines and everyday sounds. People still remembered the fire, but they also remembered Marcus standing calm in the smoke. They saw a man who did not chase revenge and did not beg for pity. They saw a man who trusted fairness and carried himself with dignity. The months before the court date felt long for Oak Street and for Marcus because time can stretch when a person is waiting for accountability. Marcus kept his routine steady, and he went to work and came home and tried to keep his thoughts from spinning late at night. He replaced small comforts first, like fixing his schedule and keeping his meals simple and taking walks after dinner. He knew that stress could quietly change a person, and he refused to let it change who he was. The case moved forward step by step with paperwork and meetings and careful review of evidence. Marcus attended a few sessions where officers explained the process and answered his questions with patience. He listened more than he spoke, and he asked only what he needed to ask. He wanted fairness and clarity more than anything else. David stayed in the background even though people expected him to step into the spotlight. He gave no speeches about the case, and he made no public statements that could tilt opinions. He told his team to keep the line clean and to treat it like every other case. He reminded them that trust in the system depended on discipline. When the court day arrived, the morning air felt sharp and bright. Marcus wore a simple suit and carried himself with quiet confidence. He walked into the building without looking for attention and without hiding either. His face showed calm, but his chest carried a heavy beat. Inside the courtroom, the room felt formal and still. The young men sat on one side with their lawyers and their families nearby. Their faces looked older than before, and their eyes avoided the crowd. They had learned that one foolish choice can pull years of trouble behind it. Marcus sat with a small support group and kept his hands folded. He did not stare at the young men with anger. He looked forward and waited for the process to begin. He reminded himself that calm was not weakness and it was strength with control. The judge spoke with a steady voice and explained that facts would guide everything. Evidence was presented in a clear order and the security footage appeared on a screen. The room watched the same moments that Oak Street had seen in whispers and rumors. Now the moments had names and timestamps and legal meaning. The young men listened as the evidence was explained. Ryan looked down and swallowed hard. Cole wiped his face with his sleeve and tried to keep breathing steady. Mason stared at the table and held his hands together tightly. When it was time for statements, the young men spoke in simple words. They admitted what they did and said they felt shame and regret. They said they did not understand the damage they were causing until it was too late. They spoke about fear and embarrassment and the wish to undo the night. Marcus was given a chance to speak as well. He stood and looked at the room and kept his voice calm and clear. He said the loss was real and the shock was real and the fear on the street was real. He said the hardest part was seeing how easily people can treat a stranger like a target. He did not ask for revenge and he did not use harsh words. He asked for accountability that helps the community heal. He asked for consequences that teach and protect and build respect for law. He said he wanted the young men to understand the weight of choices and to grow from it. The judge listened carefully and the courtroom stayed quiet. After deliberation, the judge delivered a decision based on law and evidence. The outcome included consequences that matched the seriousness of the act. It also included structured steps meant to guide the young men toward responsibility and repair. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited, but Marcus did not give a dramatic speech. He gave one short statement that fairness mattered and that he trusted the process. He then walked away with his support group and took a long breath in the open air. He felt tired but lighter, as if a tight knot had loosened. The neighborhood reacted in different ways in the following days. Some people were relieved because the case proved that evidence matters. Some people were surprised because the Attorney General did not interfere. Many people felt a renewed respect for a system that worked without favoritism. Marcus returned to Oak Street and noticed the street looked brighter than before. Not because the past was erased, but because fear had faded. Neighbors nodded to him with more warmth and more honesty. People who once whispered now offered simple greetings. One evening, a community center invited Marcus to speak. He hesitated at first because he did not like attention. Then he agreed because he understood that silence can leave a lesson unfinished. He prepared a short talk with plain words and a calm message. At the event, he stood in front of a small group of residents and young people. He talked about how success should not make someone a target. He talked about how jealousy is a quiet poison that grows when fed by friends. He talked about how courage is not destroying something but building something. He also talked about identity and dignity, and how respect should not depend on who a person is or what they own. He said people should learn names before they create stories in their minds. He said it is easy to join a crowd and hard to walk away from a bad idea. He reminded them that one good decision can save years of regret. After the talk, people came to speak with him one by one. A mother thanked him and said her son needed to hear that message. An older neighbor said Marcus handled the situation with grace. A young man quietly said he had made mistakes too and wanted to change. David attended the talk without announcing himself. He sat in the back and watched his son speak with steady strength. When it ended, he waited until the room cleared a little. He then hugged Marcus and said he was proud of his character. Marcus finally replaced the car in time, but he chose a simpler model. He realized he did not need a symbol to feel proud of his work. He needed peace and purpose and a life built on steady values. He used part of the insurance settlement to support the community center program. On a calm night, Marcus drove down Oak Street with the windows slightly open. The air felt cool and quiet, and the lamps cast familiar light. He passed the spot where the burned car once sat, and he felt a small ache and then acceptance. He understood that pain can become a lesson when a person refuses to let it become bitterness. The street remained a street, and the city remained a city, and problems still existed. But Marcus carried a stronger sense of direction now. He had seen how quickly harm can happen, and how slowly repair can grow. He chose repair.